Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. I want to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. We are talking about the Billy Meier case this evening. I'm going to dive into a subject which is, I think, challenging in some ways. I'm going to talk about one of the former incarnations of the spirit form that we call Nocodamian. Edward Albert Meyer is a farmer from Switzerland. He's also an author. He lives about 52 minutes east of Zurich by car. He's had extraterrestrial contact since he was about 5 years old. And his first mentor, Thoth, told him that in previous lives he had lived on the earth as Enoch, Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Emmanuel, and Muhammad. Now, these prophets weren't identified by the names that we use today. For example, Enoch was really called Henoch, and I believe Elijah was called Eliah, and Jeremiah is called Jeremiah today. So we're going to dive into this in a little more detail and try to make sense of all this. I do have a caller I'm going to bring on. I think it's a Skype caller. Hello,
Hi,
Skype.
Nate.
Nate, how are you?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, do you have your radio on? I mean, are you...
No, are you getting feedback? Because I'll call on my landline then, if you are.
I'm getting my own voice faintly in the background.
Okay. Let me just call you on the other line then.
No problem. I'm bringing together my panel of experts on this topic, and Eve is going to call in next, and she will then give a 50-minute lecture on this topic. I'm sorry, folks. I'm really out of control this evening. Okay, there's Eve. Hello, Eve.
Hello.
And you're wonderful. You're not echoing tonight.
I didn't touch anything.
Isn't that? I mean, I'm just thankful. Now you let me. And there is Nate. I think that's Nate. Let me try to bring him on the air. Well, that's weird. It's not letting me bring him on the air. Okay, there we go. Nate, are you there?
Yes.
Okay, now I have my two experts, my two Jmmanuel experts.
No.
Okay, folks, I am stalling here. I started out the show by talking about the previous incarnations of a spirit form that Pleyaren called Nocodamian. Today we call him Edward Albert Meyer, and allegedly the Meyer material says that he has been in previous lifetimes on the earth Enoch, Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Emmanuel. But all these prophets were known by different names in the past. And I've always wondered about this, particularly when it came to Emmanuel. Just, I guess, because I've had I've studied the Bible a lot, and I have a particular orientation, I guess, that I didn't even realize was blocking my perception where this was concerned. And the Meyer material says that the story in our New Testament is a fictionalized version of a story about a man who really lived, but the man's name was not Jesus. It was Emmanuel. Now, I always thought that sounded strange. I didn't know what to think about it, but I'm a person with an open mind. I try not to jump to conclusions too quickly. I like to listen to things and get different points of view. Well, as it goes, when you study the Meyer material, your mind gets blown. And my mind has been blown studying this topic. This next this next clip I'm going to play real quick talks about the letter J, and I'm going to play this clip, and then it's about 3 minutes long, and then we'll talk about this. And it's very relevant to what we're talking about. So
J is the youngest letter of the alphabet. The letter J is roughly 500 years old and was not part of the ancient Greek, Hebrew, or Latin alphabets. By way of contrast, the ampersand, a combination of the letters E and T, is 2,000 years old. The oldest letter is O, which has been with us for 3,000 years. J descended figuratively and literally from the letter I and was used to give a consonant sound to the letter I. Consider how the letter A sounds differently depending on the word it is used in. Baby or bath, for instance. At one time, I might have been used to sound both like I or like J. Important political and religious figures whose names started with the letter I lived before the invention of the letter J, and today their names are commonly spelled with a J rather than with an I. Julius Caesar was born in approximately 100 BC, and Jesus Christ was born in approximately 5 BC. Some scholars believe that names that began with I were pronounced as if they began with Y, and pronunciations evolved over time. To some people, there are religious implications in the spelling of religious names. Of course, there are no recordings from these time periods, and scholars must rely on ancient texts for guidance. Any books written before 1600 had no J's as we know them. In 1455, Johannes Gutenberg invented movable type, which some consider humankind's greatest invention. Gutenberg's first name likely started with I because he was born before J's were used. Copies of the Gutenberg Bible still exist, and in it Job, for instance, was spelled I-O-B. Similarly, the 1611 edition of the King James Bible had no J's, but 1769 editions of the King James Bible had J's. Some credit Italian playwright and scholar Gian Giorgio Chissano, who was born in 1478, for the official split of I from J. Chissano wrote that the consonant J should be a distinct letter from the vowel I. Similarly, Chissano wrote that the vowel U should be separate from the consonant V. Both ideas grew in popularity, and thus we have J's and U's.
Okay, what are we to learn from all this? Let me summarize this a little bit again just to make sure it's all clear. The letter J originated as a swash letter. Now, these swash letters were kind of typographical flourishes, such as an exaggerated serif. So it was the letter J really originated as a fancy I, particularly at the end of Roman numerals. The history of the English language is much different than most people would suspect. English came out of Anglo-Saxon and began around the 5th century. And the early form of English is called Old English and was spoken until sometime in about the 12th or 13th century. And there was no letter J in the Old English. So the implications of this are huge. That means in any religious writing that was written in English before the 13th century, there was no Jeremiah, there was no Jehovah, there was no Jesus, there was no Elijah, because the Old English alphabet consisted of the following letters: A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, V, X, Y, Z, and some other letters we don't use anymore. There was no W, there was no J, or U in the Old English. No books written before 1600 had the letter J in them in English. So the important political and religious figures that we know today, for example, Julius Caesar, he was never called Julius Caesar. And the same with the name Jesus Christ. Now this is mind-blowing if you think about the implications of this. And again, this person named Gian Giorgio Trissino was the first to explicitly distinguish I and J as representing some different sounds. So I got 3 callers on the air I'm going to bring on. Try to bring on Eve first of all. Eve, how are you?
I'm doing very well.
And I'm going to bring on 949. Is this Nate?
Yeah, that's Nate.
Excellent. And I got a Skype caller.
Hello?
Is this Solon?
Yeah, this is Solon. How you doing?
Pretty good. I got all my Jmmanuel experts on, so I'm just going to shut up for the next 45 minutes. Nate, do you want to start this out?
I think it's when you start talking about Julius Caesar, it reminded me of the whole changing of Mike Cullum to Christopher Columbus. You know.
Say that again.
Christopher Columbus' name isn't Christopher Columbus.
I didn't know that.
Oh, they renamed him to make it more along the line with Christianity. So, it's psyops. It's early psyops and stuff, and they've done this a lot. And now I'm thinking that maybe Julius Caesar was part of that, to make it seem like his name was more along the lines of this Jesus character, So.
Okay, my mind just got blown again. I didn't know there was really not a person named Christopher Columbus. Stunning. Solon, did you know that?
No, first I've ever heard of that.
Eve, did you know that?
But I am aware that the English language is kind of declining, and that it has been altered, because especially since I'm learning German, and we're starting to borrow so much. It's like a melting pot language.
Yeah, I listened to an article today that said it was like a collage that we had gotten much from other languages, French and German. And Eve, what do you think of all this?
What do I think? Well, I think if you found this, and this is what does it for you as far as Jmmanuel, and realizing that is probably the true story.
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of stunning to me. I'm going to mute you just for a second, Eve. For some reason now you were so clear before, but now I'm getting that dang echo again. I'm not sure what causes that. I don't know. To me, this is very, very interesting. There is a website with a pastor named Yisrael Hawkins that this next information comes from. And what I need to do is try to get a good book on the Council of Nicea, because I need to verify this from at least one other source. So I'll say that this is unverified, but this is at least one perspective on the Council of Nicea. And I got this from one person anyway, who really has a pretty good website. I was impressed by it. So Constantine was the Roman Empire around 325 A.D., and he created this meeting called the Council of Nicea, a council of Christian bishops, and it convened in Nicea, which was in the Anatolian Peninsula in Asia Minor. So it had the Black Sea to the north and the Mediterranean Sea to the south. It's in a part of what we would call Turkey today. Now, Constantine was a Roman emperor from about 306 to 337, and he enacted all kinds of changes within the Roman Empire. He actually became a Christian. Diocletian was the emperor before him, and Constantine was a lieutenant in the Roman army. And at the time that Constantine was actually in the army, they would kill the Roman soldiers that converted to Christianity. In fact, Constantine built a church called the Holy Sepulchre, which was the quote-unquote tomb of Jesus in Jerusalem. So anyway, according to at least this one perspective, Constantine got all these bishops together and said, okay, you guys have to come up with the name of the new God, or the God of the Christian religion. We have to come to an agreement on this name. So they fought and they argued and they couldn't come to agreement, and they narrowed it down to 5 names. So Constantine chose Jesus Krishna to be the official name of the Roman God. The new God was proclaimed and officially ratified by Constantine, and eventually Jesus Krishna evolved into the name that we have today by Jesus Christ. Nate, did you want to comment first?
I just wanted to, because we're talking about the name, I wanted to go and look at I think it's chapter 23, that talks, Matthew chapter 23, and they actually do mention Emmanuel as the name of this prophet.
Okay. Did you want to read it?
Oh, yeah, sure. Okay, it says, the virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us.
Solon, any comments?
Well, yeah, that's exactly what it stated in the tablet of the Emmanuel. That was actually, from what I understand, that was in the Bible and Matthew's.
I think it's maybe also mentioned in Isaiah as well. Although
might be. I'm not familiar with the Bible.
Okay.
I have the New Testament.
I have a clip here that I'm going to play, and I've got actually 2 of them, and they're actually from Christians. Okay, there is a small part of the Christian community that realizes what has happened. Now, most of them go back to Hebrew and say that Jesus was Hebrew, and that his original name, they usually say, was Yeshua, and then it was translated into Iesous in Greek, and then Iesous to Latin, and then to Jesus in English. And these are transliterations. So we're converting a text of one language to another. And now a transliteration is not a translation. For example, you might try to convert the name Chris to Chinese. There may be no Chris in Chinese, but you have to find try to find the matching letters in the alphabet. Okay, so let me play this clip, and then I'll play part of this clip, and then we can talk about it a little bit.
So where did we get the name Jesus? The name of Jesus has been popularized the world over. It has been called the only name by which one can be saved. And it is a name that has come into existence only in the last 500 years. So what is the name Jesus? The name Jesus is a transliteration. To transliterate means to replace the letters or characters of a word with corresponding letters in another alphabet. Words may be transliterated into the Roman alphabet from their originals in Greek, Chinese, Japanese, and so on. The result is a transliteration, which preserves the form of the original as distinct from a translation, which gives the equivalent word, often unrelated in form, in another language. For example, pteron is a transliteration from Greek, and wing is its translation. The name of Jesus hasn't been transliterated just once, but it's been transliterated 3 times. From Hebrew to Greek, from Greek to Latin, and from Latin to English. From Yeshua to Hesus, from Hesus to Hesus, and from Hesus to Jesus. When a word is transliterated, it loses its original meaning. That's because a transliteration preserves only the form of the original. So you use English letters to sound out a foreign word. A translation gives the equivalent word in another language. It doesn't sound at all like the word in the original language. It sounds like an English word. Therefore, Jesus has no meaning in English. Jesus has no meaning in Latin, and Jesus has no meaning in Greek. They are just forms of the original Hebrew word. We know that Jesus was a Jew. So we know that Jesus has a Jewish name. And that Jewish name of Jesus has a meaning. Yeshua is the name of Jesus in Hebrew. Yeshua is translated with the English word salvation. So Yeshua means salvation.
Anyway, the speaker will go on. I think he did a pretty good job of laying it out, but he'll kind of go on into the Old Testament and try to connect the two. Nate, do you have any comment on any of this?
I guess that opens a new can of questions. You know, what does they say? Yeshua? It was the name, his Jewish name. Is that correct?
Yeshua, yeah.
Yeshua. So then the Emmanuel name, is that? Do we know if Emmanuel is actually a Jewish name?
Emmanuel. My understanding is Emmanuel is actually a Lyrian word. It goes back to Lyrian times, 389,000 years ago, when the Lyranians first came here. Emmanuel, it means the one with godly knowledge of an Jshwish. And it's one of the old traditional first names in what's called form. Now, is the prefix for ancient that's used in a lot of the Maya writings. In other words, it means that Emmanuel is a very old name that goes back to the old Lyranians and Vagans. Now, if anyone's new to the show, they probably aren't familiar with that, but the Lyranians, according to Maya material, came into the Milky Way galaxy millions, if not billions of years ago, and they settled in Lyra Vega. And then they conquered other worlds. They mixed with other people. They colonized other worlds. They were titans. They were some 20 to 30 feet tall sometimes. They had incredible abilities in their material consciousness. They could do telepathy, telekinesis. When they got here to the Earth about 389,000 years ago, there was about 2 million of them. And they did have a colony here for a while, but they violated some of their own laws, their own rules, and they mixed with the native Earth people, who they called the Evas. Evas meant they had to bear some abuse in some cases. The long and short of the story is that these Lyranians that violated their own rules and laws decided to enter into what they called a codex. And the codex was an agreement that they would die here on the Earth as Earth humans, and then in their subsequent later lives, they would have to help undo the damage that they did. And according to Maya information, there are spirit forms on the Earth that are very ancient spirit forms that have incarnated again and again here on the Earth. Some of the people that are in the Figu group probably are some of these people who had what they call the best among, which is the destiny, to come back and help out with this mission. So that is a long answer to a short question. Where does the name Jmmanuel come from? So evidently it's one of those very old Lyrian terms. We had another caller I was going to bring on the air that called in just shortly. Solon, did you have anything, questions or comments? Still there, Solon?
Yeah, okay. I didn't realize I had the mute button on or not. I actually, a lot of this stuff is new to me. I did read the Talmud, and I have known that about the changing of the language, but some of this stuff is I'm still learning about as well. So I don't really have too many questions. Just more of like you. I kind of want to hear more about this.
Well, it blows my mind. I have another Christian pastor here that's going to explain why the name Jesus isn't really accurate. So if that person, whoever called in, can certainly call back and I'll bring you on the air. I didn't mean to not bring you on there. I just wanted to get a few things out. Here we go.
Well, that's a really good question. Where does the name Jesus come from? Well, the name Jesus, most people think that Jesus comes out of the Greek translation of the Bible. And a lot of people think that was his name, the Savior's name. But in reality, Jesus' real name was Yeshua. We have to remember that Jesus was a Jew, he was a Hebrew, and he spoke Hebrew. He was not walking around speaking Greek. I think we have to remember as Christians that Greek is the language of pagans. This is the language of idol worshippers. It's the language of the mythological gods. Hebrew is called the holy tongue, the holy language. And so you can imagine if an invading force came into to America and said they're going to force everybody to speak, a different language, we would all fight to hold on to our native tongue. Well, the language of the Greeks in the mind of a Hebrew was an unholy and an unclean thing. But so Jesus' name would have been Yeshua. As a matter of fact, nobody would have ever called him Jesus. First of all, the fact that there isn't a J in the Hebrew alphabet. There's no way to even call him Jesus. There's no way that God's name is Jehovah. There is no J sound in Hebrew to begin with. So just starting off there, there is no way that he could have been called Jesus, and on top of that, Jesus isn't even from the Greek translation either. As a matter of fact, if you take the Greek word, when people took the Hebrew scripture or the Hebrew word Yeshua and tried to put it into Greek, they couldn't do it. A couple of reasons. Number one, Greek doesn't have a y sound like in the word Yeshua. They don't have a y or a y, so they couldn't do that. So they did the best they could, and they made an I and an E kind of sound, which is like a E, and then they don't have a sh sound in Greek either, like the word Yeshua. They couldn't say Yeshua in Greek, so all they could do is an S sound. So when they took Yeshua and put it into Greek, it became Yesus. And then when we put it into English, we took Jesus into English. And after a period of time, in our English has really developed and morphed a lot. And after we had that name for a while, and it's in a lot of Bibles and things, and when we started changing our language, Jesus became Jesus, because we stopped using the I in English and we made the J instead. And so Jesus became Jesus, and we got rid of the O out of the name because that fell out of use. As a matter of fact, I lived for 10, 11 years in Britain, and they still spell words with that O-U in it. Like color is O-U-R, and honor is H-O-N-O-U-R. And so we had that Jesus, the O-U in there, but we pulled that out. So Jesus is basically a modified, broken down English version of the English translation of the Greek word Jesus, but actually came out of the Hebrew word Yeshua. As a matter of fact, if we would have just translated from Hebrew into English, everybody would be calling Jesus Yeshua, because...
Okay, that is the perspective of certain groups in the Christian religion, which I think have done some reasonable homework there, trying to sort all this out. Now, the Meyer information says that this prophet, his name was Jmmanuel, not Yeshua. And if you go back to the story as it comes from the Meyer information, there was a Greek Orthodox priest, Jshwish, who, well, I think he was with Billy when the Talmud of Emmanuel was originally discovered, when the old script was originally discovered, and then Jshwish started the translation process of the Talmud of Emmanuel, and it was written in Aramaic, not Hebrew. And a certain amount of it, I think, was effectively translated into German. Now, at some point here, Jshwish was killed by the Mossad, and I believe the original script, the original codex, was burned in a fire. And I think there is a new translation of the Talmud right now that is currently being sponsored. Is that correct, Nate?
Yeah, that's correct. It's fantastic, actually. As I get to see the first draft of a lot of it, and what makes it really awesome is that they go into I don't know really how to say this, but they go into like the history and what certain words would mean. For example, different changings of history. The current Bible has 10 commandments. Well, the original version had 12 commandments. Some of the Beatitudes from the Sermon on the Mount, those are also talked about, and I don't know. I find that because when I was young, I was actually I was forced to read the Beatitudes when I got in trouble. So, and it just made me really confused. But then later on, when I did discover the Talmud Emmanuel, it made a lot more sense. But what is it? What actually I found interesting, maybe a little off topic here, but the other day I was having a conversation with my mom and trying to show her certain things from Jim Deerdorf's book, Celestial Teachings, or something. And basically on the back of the book it has the Beatitude, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And then it has the Talmud, which one it came from. The Talmud says, blessed are those who are rich in spirit, for they shall recognize the truth, and life will be theirs. But when I was talking to my mom, interesting enough, about the word poor, she said, no, that means humble. I'm like, it means humble. Well, how do I mean lacking? How would I say lacking? You know, because I think a lot of the stuff was written by the plutocracy at the time to kind of keep people in line, and you had this small amount of haves and this huge amount of have-nots, and you had to feed the have-nots something that they could be proud of. Hey, you know, being poor and, you know, feeding your kids dirt is you know, it's their gateway to heaven. So carry on.
Well, one of the fundamental differences, I think, in the teaching in the Talmud of Emmanuel, and probably in the teaching that's in the Bible, is Emmanuel always talked about the creation, which the creation you could call the universal consciousness. Now, how does that differ from our notion of God? Well, in the Christian Bible, we have a notion that the creator of the universe is all-knowing. He never changes, and sometimes he's wrathful, sometimes he's angry. He's called a jealous God, and certain passages in the Old Testament, like in Numbers 31, he commanded Moses to kill the women, to wipe out the Midianites. And then when they came back and they didn't kill the women and children, Moses was enraged and told them to go back and kill the women and children. and take the virgins for themselves. Now, the idea of the universal consciousness, which the Meyer material also calls the creation, is that the universal consciousness is a superintelligence, but it's not anthropomorphic in any way. It doesn't become angry, it doesn't become jealous. It doesn't even get involved in human affairs, particularly in our wars. It's a neutral, positive entity. It's neither good nor evil. And it created our universe for the purpose of evolution. And it's evolving, it's changing, it's growing. And it creates human spirits to help in this evolutionary process. Now, each one of us have a human spirit. The human spirit is the bearer of the creative realm. It never dies. It never sleeps during your deepest sleep. It records all of your thoughts, and it records something called your impulsations. And it resides in an area of your brain called the superior colliculus. And it's the part of you that is always alive. In other words, if your physical body dies, your spirit form will leave the body, and it will go into the spiritual realm, and it will bring with it your material consciousness from your last lifetime. And that material consciousness will be processed in something called the overall consciousness block. And everything in your life that had evolutive value, your experiences that had evolutive value, will eventually be stored in your spirit form. All of those things like patience and love and forgiveness and all of these neutral, positive, evolutive values will be stored in your spirit form. Your spirit form will process the information from your previous life, and then after a certain amount of time that varies, on our world, the normal time in the spiritual realm is about 150 years, a lifetime and a half, and then that spirit form will then be placed into the body of a child 21 days after the sperm fertilizes the egg. The wisdom of the predecessor personalities go into the subconscious mind of this brand new child. The conscious mind then gets a new personality, a new intellect, and as that child grows up again, it will get inspiration from its predecessor personalities, and it will get something called impulses, signals from the universal consciousness, from the storage banks of the universe, from the planetary storage banks. And that's the way that wisdom builds on top of wisdom, lifetime after lifetime. And the purpose of all these incarnations, and we go through millions, if not billions of them, is to gain wisdom to evolve our consciousness. Our spirit form needs a material consciousness to evolve. And that's why we have to keep coming back into a material life. And Nate, I don't know about you, but I think it's a shame that our religions, mostly, particularly Christianity, have erased this whole idea of reincarnation.
Yeah, especially since it's so prevalent in the teachings of Emmanuel, and a lot of, and as you were saying this, the idea of cyclical kept on coming up, a macrocosm, microcosm.
Yeah.
And nature works in cycles. Everything we see works in cycles, and it's self-repairing and self-destroying. But it continues in the cycle. And to say that that all of a sudden there's a perfect place, there's a perfect thing, at which time and point there could be no change to it, because any type of change or any type of thought in that place would alter it somehow. Just is not seen in nature at all. So how you would come up with this idea and then have people buy into it, or buy into it, and assume that, you know, it's okay because, you know, I'm going to go to this perfect place. Sucks for you because you're not, you know, unless you believe like me. Well, what is belief? Well, don't question.
That's interesting. Belief meaning don't question.
Yeah, I think that's also another important thing to get to here. It's not Christianity isn't the poison until, you know, it's belief that it's the poison. So it's the framework in which you take something that it becomes the poison. So like one of the recurring themes in the Maya material is, hey man, you're responsible, 100% responsible for what you do, think, feel, and say. We're not going to give you the answer. We might tell you, hey, you know, we're going to try to mimic your spirit, because when you were also saying when the spirit impulses from lifetime to lifetime, I mean, it's not controlling you. You know, it's not controlling your ego. It's for your ego to kind of, it's for your, you know, your conscious self to kind of realize, oh, okay, well, here's some things that I can use. You know, it's kind of like leading the horse to water but not making them drink. You know, say, hey, I'm impulsing you. I'm not controlling you, but I'm saying, hey, here's kind of like a nudge of nudges, but, you know, I'm not taking your hand and putting it here.
It's interesting you say that, because I read in one of Billy's writings called The Goblet of Truth not that long ago, something that really stuck with me. It said the life-giving energy of creation wants to come into harmonious concord with all people, with the planet, and with the entire universe. And I had to go look up the word concord to really understand what it was saying there. And concord means to join, to fit together. So this life-giving energy of creation, which is sometimes called the effective truth, is, like you brought up there, impulsing, probably the best way to say it, is impulsing us. Now, one of the examples of this impulsing, the most powerful example, is in that writing Where It All Began. When Billy was a very young boy, he was like 4 years old. He's living in Niederflachs, which is really close to Bulak, Switzerland. It's 3 a.m. It's a warm May evening, and he just wakes up out of a deep sleep and crawls out this lower window, and he sits down on a bench, and he looks up at a beautiful starry sky, and he sees the light of the stars, but he senses something he calls the love of creation, and he hears his own voice say, my life exists because of the love of creation. And then he hears his own voice again say, since ancient times I lived among the stars, and he talks about being filled with good memories, and he knew his purpose in his life at that point. And I really always go back to that, because I think that is part of what we've lost here on the earth, is we've lost our sense of connectivity with all things. And that's why we're destroying our environment. I think we're even destroying our own psyche sometimes. We're destroying. Go ahead.
Well, I have something to say on this subject.
Sure.
I think this comes. You know, I've heard you say this quite a few times, and I think it's a beautiful story. And I would definitely say that those sound like impulses that he was getting from himself. And I find that many of us get these impulses, and it kind of comes down with the fact that we don't. The way I've kind of looked at this neutral, positive way of thinking is that we can see the outcomes of everything we do. For instance, like what I'm doing right now, I'm trying to learn German so I can read better and speak better. But not only that, I'm exercising my mind. And I find that whenever you do hard work, there's always a great outcome of this. I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought.
Oh, that's okay.
Whenever you do hard work, there's
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, and this is kind of where beliefs kind of destroy a lot of this, because now you're no longer thinking about the outcomes. You're saying, hey, I can just pray and it'll just go away, instead of being, hey, you know what, I made a mistake and I need to make sure I don't do this again, or however your processing of this information takes place.
I think we need to forgive ourselves too when we make mistakes. I think we need to be responsible, but we also need to forgive ourselves, because sometimes I think we absorb a lot of disharmony in our psyche. And that's one of the things my material talks about is looking at our psyche, looking at our thoughts, and if we are experiencing disharmony in our psyche, that we should reach down there and maybe throw out the thought that is causing that disharmony. The other thing is, which is even more interesting and more complicated, is that sometimes, Nate, I think you can correct me if I'm wrong, but don't feelings can also generate thoughts?
Yeah, it actually works as a feedback loop. It's the original beginning of the feeling will be a thought, either conscious, subconscious, or unconscious. Good luck figuring that out. But
I wanted to ask you about that.
Well, that is in the Billy.
Say that again.
That's in Billy's book, The Psyche.
Yeah. Now you thought you mentioned. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Nate. The subconscious, the conscious, and the unconscious, and then you said, "Yeah, try to figure all that out." That's the one thing I'm trying to do right now. That is difficult to distinguish. Go ahead. I interrupt you. We can get back to that idea.
So I would also, as the book The Psyche was mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
In there it talks about some in order to start determining where these different thoughts and feelings are coming from, that you should practice meditation, and it gives you several examples of how to meditate, and what's the word? Education on meditation. There's currently I'm in the middle part of the meditation again, looking at a candle, thinking of the word sun for the first 6 days, starting at 5 minutes to get to 12 minutes, then 12 minutes to 15 minutes, and the next 6 days you think of the word. Looking at the bottom part of the candle, you think of nothing. Clear your mind.
Mm-hmm.
Don't let any thought in your mind, and then after 6 more days, you move on to picturing a golden rose or a red rose in your head, trying to hold on to that image while you're looking at the candle. And on the 6, 6, and 6, and then there's one more day at the end of this that you what they call I forgot. But it has to do with imaginative, wishful thinking.
Oh, really?
So, yeah. So
that's interesting.
And I have had really good results on. I had 3 days of bliss, and it says when you hit that bliss state, you'll understand that's part of the meditative force that they're talking about.
Well, we need to talk more about that offline, because I think I want to try to do that. My meditation isn't exactly what Billy teaches. It's been very helpful for me, but I might be ready to actually try this what you're talking about. I when he was talking about letting nothing into your mind, that's kind of the way I meditate. And it puts me into like a pre-sleep state, and I can stay there. If I'm doing it really well, I can stay there for an hour and a half or whatever. And it's so restful. But I'm real interested in what you're doing there, especially that 3 days of bliss.
Oh, yeah. That was awesome when it worked, because I sent you something a little while back that had to do with occultic forces and meditation.
Oh, yeah. That was weird. I didn't understand that. That was weird. That was very weird.
Yeah. So if I'll put a link.
You want to try to explain any of that?
Well, I would think we'd have to start the show at that level, but I will say this, that part of the problem when you start getting into meditation is the ego. For lack of a better term, I'm just going to call it the ego. Tries to convince you that something else is more important, and it will work very hard to work against you. And I've experienced this. I've gone on meditation like tears where I was like doing it consistently every day, and all of a sudden, I fall away from it. Just thinking, because everything is going good now, so why do I need to continue? Or whatever reason you give yourself to stop. So it's.
I got a great message here from the chat room. Soul Connection says it's been meditating 3 hours a day since 1973. That is incredible, Soul. And he says stopping the mind is the easiest thing in the world after you have identified with the silence of the universe. Oh, I love that. That's fascinating. I lately, and this isn't quite meditation, but since I rescued those 2 cats, a lot of times I'll sit out with them in the evenings or in the mornings and watch the sun come up and go down. And it's so relaxing. I can't even describe it. It's almost like a meditative state. I'm just listening to nature, listening to the birds sing. It's a wonderful thing. Nate, you were also talking about the unconscious mind. I have a clip here. I might not play all of it, but there's a lot more going on in our unconscious than we realize. For example, if you burn your hand on a hot stove, that's all done by the unconscious mind. When you pull back, you don't even register that consciously. That happens in the unconscious mind, which goes down into the brainstem. So automatic things come out of the unconscious, and I think this is speculation a little bit on my part. Like some aspects of music, they become so ingrained, they become part of the unconscious. You don't have to think about them. Probably typing is the same way. Let's listen to a little bit of this clip, and then we'll talk about it.
You don't know this young woman, but whether you want to or not, in this very moment you've already passed judgment on her. In a split second you've already decided if you find her trustworthy, competent, likable. No doubt your brain is a state-of-the-art marvel, managing 90% of everything you do without letting you know, regardless of whether you're awake or asleep. When you think you have an idea, your brain has already had that idea. For instance, take a look at this sentence. Can you still understand this alphabet soup? Most people can. Your brain automatically puts the letters back in the correct order. Something in your head navigates you through the everyday adventures of modern life. Something that decides things for you before you can think about it. Because your brain is always on automatic.
We're driven by our unconscious mind. Isn't that the interesting thing? So much of what we do is unconscious. The decisions we make are almost dictated to us. I often wonder who's in charge here. Who's running the show? How much control do we really have?
Unconscious influences are there everywhere. And as research progresses, it's never going the other way. It's not saying, we used to think these things were all unconscious. Now we find out they're conscious. It's exactly the opposite. All these things we thought, because we thought everything was conscious, smaller, 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 smaller. It's become the incredible shrinking little man in the head.
There's all sorts of gaps in our perception and outright confabulations that our brains are making for us in order for us to exist, because it's easier to do that than actually to try and make an accurate representation of the world. It's faster and easier for us to estimate what the world's going to look like, because it usually works just fine.
However, some people are out to fool us on purpose. People like Apollo Robbins, a magician, and the gentleman thief of the desert town Las Vegas. Apollo not only deceives our eyes, but more importantly, our brains.
So they go on here to talk a little bit about how the magician can fool the conscious mind by doing certain things. I thought it was real interesting how the clip talked about so much being unconscious. There is a whole lot that we need to learn about. I'm going to put a link in there. It's www.exopoliticsohio.us. I put that in the chat room. I have 2 Billy Meyer pages. So if you click on one of the Billy Meyer links, Billy Meyer 1, Billy Meyer 2, you can go to the notes that I've been putting together on these various topics. And if you find some of these interesting, you can actually find some of the movies. You'll have to scan down through the notes there. I'll have links to some of these clips we play, so you can listen to the whole movie if you found them interesting. Nate, did you want to? We got about 2-3 minutes left. Is there any closing thoughts on the Talmud of Emmanuel or anything like that, or the Might of the Thoughts that you wanted to bring up?
Sure. I dropped a link in the chat room. It's Contact Report 154, and I think it's good in understanding a point of view on unconscious and how it leads to destiny. So if people are interested, if they want to take a look at that, it's Contact Report 154 from the Future of Mankind.co.uk site.
And there's probably a whole lot to that contact, isn't there?
Yeah, actually.
What's really bad about the Meyer material is there's so much information here. Literally, just to keep what you've learned, you've got to repeat a lot. At least I have to. I probably studied Contact 154. I don't know how much I retained, maybe about 3% of it. But we kind of have to keep moving sometimes, too. So the translation of the Talmud of Emmanuel is still moving forward well?
Yeah, actually, we went on a little hiatus, but I recently got in chapters 17 and 18. So, it's moving forward.
That's excellent.
Maybe sometime next year, towards the end of the year, we'll have it completed.
Oh, that soon?
Okay. Yeah, I would think so.
Oh, that would be awesome, man. And I think to understand it all, I think hopefully this show helped set the stage a little bit. I want to thank Solon for coming on, and Nate and Eve. Sorry, Eve, for muting you. I don't know why you started echoing again. That's such a frustrating thing. We'll get you figured out one of these days. But, folks, thanks. I want to thank everyone in the chat room that came. We got 3 guests in, Janet L. and Nate, and I think we had a couple other folks earlier. Thanks, folks. I appreciate you coming. You're listening to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder, and we'll be back next week at about this time. Talk to you next time. Good night.